And here's a closer look at the sunspot record here. And that is compared with thermometer readings for the last 150 years, roughly. And once again, we see a decent correlation between the two. The link between sunspots and climate is not really a new idea. It goes back into the centuries. The famous American astronomer, William Herschel, the man who actually discovered the planet Uranus, claimed that he could predict the price of wheat based on the sunspot cycle. So it's not really a new idea, and the correlation has been established for a century, and it's never really been disputed in the scientific literature. And so next we have what's called the, Also, I want to point out this part of the graph here, the period of time from the 1940s to the 1970s, where there is a slight decrease in temperature. And I was going to lie, but I don't know if any of you remember this, but this led to the global cooling scare of the 1970s. Back in the 1970s, the scientific consensus was that we might be heading to another ice age. And here are some news headlines from the time. Climate change, chilling possibilities. This cooling has already killed hundreds of thousands of people. If it continues and no strong action is taken, it will cause world famine, world chaos, and world war, and this could all happen before the year 2000. So that was from a famous book that was written at the time by an author, Lowell Pont. Here another one, brace yourself for another ice age. The glacial era is coming. So kind of displays the concerns that people had at the time. And next up we have what's called MBH99, named after the three authors, Mann, Bradley, and Hughes, and it's been nicknamed the hockey stick graph for some obvious reasons. Mainly it kind of looks like a hockey stick. So anyways, it shows a significant, and this was originally published in Nature in 1999, and it was also shown in the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, third assessment report in 2001, and it shows a drastically different view of the climate history of the last millennium. The medieval warm period and the Little Ice Age do not really appear in the climate record at all. Instead, we see a climate that's relatively stable from the period of time of 1000 to the year 1900, followed by an abrupt increase in temperature in the 20th century. So this led to the conclusion that the 20th century is the warmest time in the last 1,000 years, and the recent warming over the last 100 years is unprecedented in the climate record. But let's take a closer look at this graph. So it's actually created from two different sets of data. The black here is multi-proxy reconstruction up to about 1960 or so. And it uses a variety of proxies, ice cores, corals, and the main proxy that used is tree ring growth. And the yellow area here is the uncertainty associated with those multi-proxy measurements. So the uncertainty is almost at the same scale as the recent warming in the last 100 years. Also, the red portion of the graph is the sea surface temperature thermometer readings of roughly the last 100 years. So this led some people to be suspicious as to how this graph was created. One of the main questions people were asking was why tree rings were used as the main proxy to create this graph, when tree rings are not known to be the best temperature proxies, because tree rings growth is affected by more than just temperature. It's affected by things like rainfall, sunlight, competition from other plants, forest fires, pests, nutrient availability, and so on. Not only that, don't get you only get an estimate of growth during a few months of the year, because tree rings do not grow for the whole year. And it's also been, some people have also wondered why the sea surface thermometer record was used to construct the temperature over the last 100 years, because the IPCC itself acknowledges that the sea surface temperature record is affected by what's called the urban heat island effect. So the temperature readings are suggested to be skewed by their proximity to urban centers. Okay, so I also think it's kind of funny how the kink in the hockey stick is right where the two data sets have been spliced together. So that kind of makes me suspicious as well. One of the main criticisms came in the year 2003 by Eminem. Now, I'm not talking about the rap singer. He's not really known for his scientific criticisms. And these guys aren't nuts either. I'm not talking about the M&Ms with the thick candy shell. I'm talking, of course, about Stephen McIntyre, the mining executive from Toronto, and Ross McKittrick, associate professor of economics at the University of Guelph. And they decided to do an analysis of the data and methodology that was used to produce the hockey stick graph. And they found that there were 112 proxy series used to produce the hockey stick graph. But 35 of the proxy series that were listed as being used weren't actually used to construct the graph. Some of the data series were actually duplicated. Some of the data series were mapped to incorrect geographical positions. And when they corrected for these minor errors that existed in the graph, they found that it took on a little bit of a different shape. Instead of the usual hockey stick shape, the 20th century was no longer the warmest in the last 600 years. Another interesting discovery that McIntyre and McKittrick came up with was when they reviewed the computer algorithm that was used to process the data. And so they found that the computer algorithm tended to preferentially select data series that exhibited 20th century growth spurts. So here's what I mean. These are 4 graphs here, and one of them is the hockey stick from the year 1400 to about 1960. And the other 3 graphs here are using the same computer program, but using completely random data. So, can anyone tell which one of these is the hockey stick graph? Yeah, it's exactly this one. Okay, next. Okay, anyways, McIntyre and McKittrick's criticism of the hockey stick graph finally made it into the journal Energy and Environment, and as a result, the hockey stick did not appear in the recent IPCC's 4th Assessment Report of 2006. Instead, in its place, we see this figure. And this is what McIntyre and McKittrick referred to as a spaghetti graph. So we see a bunch of different data sets here, supposedly independent studies that confirm the conclusions of the hockey stick graph in the 3rd assessment report, namely that the 20th century warming is unprecedented in the rest of the record.